blur and I can't find the right distance.
I think it just turned 5:30. Okay, I'd like to welcome everyone out this evening. We do have a workshop scheduled for 5:30 p.m., and that is what time it is now. So we will begin. So this is a discussion workshop by the Planning and Zoning Director concerning potential amendments within the Caldwell City Code, Chapter 10. So Chapter 10 is our zoning ordinance, and as you've probably heard me say before, our zoning ordinance is, I consider it a living, breathing document. It's something that does change over time as things change in the building world and the development world. Our zoning ordinance needs to adapt to that. And so we are always looking at, do we need to improve it, change it? What do we need to do to it? So I know that they've been looking at a lot. So this is just going to be, I think, kind of a brief overview on some of the changes we're looking at. We're looking at some more extensive ones down the road, if I'm not mistaken. So with that, Director Collins, I'll turn the time over to you.
Perfect. Thank you, Mayor and City Council. Good evening. I'm here to present, like the Mayor said, we have, as staff, have looked through our city code quite extensively. I will tell you, we have a very long list of amendments that will be coming forward probably in the next 12 to 18 months, which will also include amending the code once the comprehensive plan is updated so that we have the proper codes to affect that vision and those goals within that comprehensive plan. We plan to start some workshops with you after the first of the year here. And as we're preparing for those workshops to start going through kind of more complex, more substantial ordinance changes, we have identified a couple of changes that we wanted to bring to you now before the end of the year that need addressed a little bit sooner due to various reasons. So just as we start through, one of the first proposed amendments to Chapter 10 is a creation of a public zoning district. I think in the past you've probably heard us talk about how in the comprehensive plan there is a public land use designation, but in our zoning code there is currently no public zoning district. So that brings some challenges when people are wanting to do a project or even build something of a certain height, because all too often they may have to conform to residential requirements, which are very restrictive when it comes to commercial. And so what we're trying to do is address this now, because there has been a lot of development happening on some public facilities, and we know that there are more coming down the pipe here over the next year. So we are looking at creating this district, a purpose statement for it, associated land uses, and then those development standards that go along with it. These changes, I just want to highlight, have no impact to the requirements or development standards for private development. This is only addressing public, so it'll be local, state, federal buildings, like City Hall, post offices, public schools, Canyon County buildings, those types of facilities will not impact private development whatsoever. The other amendment that we are packaging with this is an amendment to our sign regulations. This is to reduce the height of signs when they are in the airport overlay from 90 foot to 80 foot. This is in preparation for when the city expands their airport. The FAA will start regulating that the height is limited to 80-foot maximum. So we're trying to get ahead of the curve on this and just go ahead and package these amendments with this one. This will have some impact, obviously, to private development, but is necessary for us to meet those FAA requirements. So because of the FAA one, the sign regulations is pretty explanatory. I'm not really going to go into any more detail in that unless you have questions. But I do want to touch a little bit on the public zoning district amendments and some of just the issues and the reason for this that we've seen. So again, City Code has no zoning district specific to public and quasi-public land uses. We have no zoning district that corresponds to the public land use designation in the comp plan. So currently if somebody wants to develop and they need to do something, they need to rezone, they're out of compliance with the comp plan. We have nowhere to put them. A lot of these properties are currently zoned R1, even though they're owned by public facilities. And the goal is to build public facilities, and it could be anything from a city hall to even just a park or a parks and recreation building, or like I said, a public school. And sometimes they have challenges with that because you're restricted for height, and setbacks are pretty restrictive in an R1 zone and buffering, where all of your other commercial zones in the city have no height limitations. They have really minimal setbacks, and so these public facilities should be very similar to those commercial buildings. Again, we don't have any provisions in our code regulating future development of these types of uses. So we've seen a lot of these projects wanting to request a rezone, or which then triggers a comp plan amendment so that they can build a public parking garage, or so that Canyon County can expand onto their campus, or whatever it may be. And so, again, we recognize that there's problems with our code if we're seeing that they're having to do rezones and comp plan amendments. So we're trying to fix that problem as well. And then the city code was missing some public land use types that are more the trend, that are coming into play, and that could be anything from, you know, a skywalk or something to a public parking garage versus a private parking garage. So we've just we're proposing to add some of those land use types in there with some specifications for how they're to be built. So again, the purpose of this amendment is to address development barriers, help reduce the amount of land use requests, and address the issues that arise as a result of those requested rezones and comp plan amendments, bring our city code into conformance with the existing and the future comp plan. This will not change with the comp plan update because we already recognize that those public uses need to be zoned public land, and we also recognize that they need to have a public zoning associated with them. So these will all be recommendations already going to the new comprehensive plan, so this change will not change with the new comp plan. And then again, to provide some provisions regulating future development of public and quasi-public uses. So basically, this is a summary of what we're changing. It's pretty minor, actually. And this is scheduled to go to the Planning and Zoning Commission for consideration tomorrow night. It is scheduled to come before City Council in December. But we wanted to take this opportunity to kind of bring this before you, discuss it, get any potential comments or feedback that we can maybe address prior to it coming to City Council for final approval. So the summary is basically we're just creating a public zoning district and that purpose statement that's already in the code. The purpose statement basically just tells you why we're creating that district. It's for public and quasi-public uses to correlate with the comp plan, and it's for things like I said, public buildings, post offices, public schools, similar uses. Amend the land use schedule to add that public district designation, and then specify the associated land uses that are either permitted or permitted through a special use permit in that zoning district, just like every other zone. Amend the height, setback, and area table to again add that public district in there, and then add those dimensional standards for buildings and structures built within that district. And then just to modify some of the existing formatting and footnotes for clarity. While we were in there and we opened up this ordinance, we also recognized that there are some footnotes that when it went into the codifiers, they enlarged those footnotes and they almost look like part of the code instead of a footnote. So we're basically just decreasing those to make them look like a footnote, and then modifying some of the language to clarify some of the issues that we've seen. So before I go into the sign code, is there any questions on the public zoning district so far?
Councilor Stoddard?
Mr. Mayor, Director, how do we marry the public and private districts together? In other words, if we have a public zoning district, are there private entities in that public zoning district, or how do you set up the boundaries for something like that?
Sure, Mayor and Councilman Stoddard, there may be some potential uses that may be considered more quasi-public, but you're not going to have land uses permitted in there like, say, retail or something like that. within that public zoning district. It is meant to be more for actual public facilities that may have special needs or special requirements for their development. A lot of other jurisdictions have public zoning district designations, and that's how they kind of separate those more like civic uses. So you could have like a conference center in the public, because you could have a public conference center. You might have a performing arts center, but it's more like, it might be owned by the city, so it's public. So that you will have to differentiate, like, is it a privately owned facility or is it actually a public? Or quasi-public could be something like, I just totally lost my train of thought.
Caldwell Housing.
Caldwell Housing.
Thank you. My brain went blank. The Caldwell Housing Authority. So you could have like a facility like that is quasi-public. Or say if Urban Renewal had their own building, or maybe Destination Caldwell, that's kind of quasi-public. So you'd have those types of uses.
Okay, so retailing and businesses like that would not be allowed within that public zoning public zoning district?
They would not.
Okay, thank you.
Counselor McGee.
Thanks, Mayor. Robin, can I ask a question about that FAA
Yeah, absolutely.
in anticipation of that expansion? So I was asking Councilor Allgood, and we were trying to think of existing signs that might be in that area. And the only thing I could come up with was the Flying J truck stop that has a sign that's that tall. If they are, one, are there any signs in that existing area? And then two, would they be grandfathered in under this, or how would that work?
Mayor and Councilor McGee, that is an excellent question. Yes, they would be grandfathered in. It would actually probably be more up to FAA at that time to do some regulation on the ones that are grandfathered in. So this ordinance will only impact future ones. It will not impact any existing signs. And it's really more for, I was going to get into that, there's a C4 zoning designation on our zoning map at the very end of the runway. And in that designation, the current code says that in the C4 zoning district, your signs can go up to 90 feet. What we're going to do is just propose to say, except if you're in the APO 1, you're limited to a maximum of 80 feet. So that's really the only change we're making. It will not affect any existing signage. It will not affect anybody that is currently submitted for sign permits, even though they haven't come before council yet, or they don't come before council, but if they were an SUP, go before hearing examiner, it would not impact any of the existing signs. Yeah, of course.
Okay. Yeah, Counselor Allgood.
Yeah, Robin, back to this, public, zoning situation. So just in the mechanics, if there was a piece of property out there and a school district, say it's zoned R1, a school district acquires it, does it automatically shift to that new zoning designation, or is that something they would come before council and say, we're requesting a zoning change, or how does that work?
Mayor and Councilor Allgood, that's a great question as well. No, if they wanted to switch to the public zoning designation, they would have to apply for a rezone and come before council. So we're providing the ability to have that public zoning district. We're providing some allowances that they would be able to do now without rezoning, but if they wanted to do all of the full allowances of the public district, they would have to rezone to the public zoning district.
Okay. Any other questions at this time?
Mr. Mayor,
Yeah,
just
Counselor Stronick.
clarification for the airport, end of runway, make any difference which direction the end of the runway is? Whether it's east or west, or, you know?
Mayor, you might be able to help me with this, but I don't think it does, because I think, isn't it approach and departure?
So it just, the APO 1's overlay district
Right.
would, it extends
Yeah.
on both ends of
Yeah,
it.
Okay.
both
So just
ends,
within
yeah.
that APO 1 that's already been
Yeah.
designated.
But as far as FAA, I think they do both, right? The approach and the
I'm
landing?
not certain, to be honest.
Okay. Or the departure, yeah,
Yep.
yeah.
Thank you.
Any other questions on the public district that we can answer? at this time? Okay, perfect. Again, just touch on this a little bit. Proposed to reduce the height of buildings within the C4. It's actually signs. Sorry, that's an error in there. It should say signs in the C4, just from 90 foot to 80 foot, just for FAA regulations. That's it. So if there's no more questions on that, I'm going to move on to the second topic. It's pretty good. 15 minutes and I'm on the second topic. I planned that pretty well. I know, right? The second one is swimming pool barriers. So just a little history. Currently, swimming pools are regulated out of two different areas. They're regulated out of the building department under the International Swimming Pool and Spa Code. They're also regulated out of Caldwell City Code in our zoning ordinances by the Planning and Zoning Department. Historically, these two codes have been somewhat aligned in their requirements. So previously, the Swimming Pool and Spa Code said, you had to have a barrier, either directly around your pool, or if it was further out, then you had to have alarms on your doors with that barrier. That code has been changed. They now allow an exception to that you could provide an ASTM 1346 lockable safety cover in lieu of the requirement for the fence barrier. Our zoning ordinance still requires, though, you to have the adjacent side and rear yards to be completely screened off with a 6-foot high fence. As you could imagine, this has created some frustration with the pool industry on the misalignment, and I don't even know if it's misalignment, because sometimes you do see this. You do see zoning ordinances that may be more restrictive or have something that's different than your building codes or whatever. But it has caused some frustration with the pool industry. So staff wanted to bring this before City Council. Scott Lang, which is the owner of Premier Pools and Spa, is here and has requested to speak to City Council on behalf of the pool industry. He'd like to share with you how these particular code sections, because they are not in alignment, has created some challenges for the pool industry. And so if council would allow him to come forward and have that discussion, then staff would be looking for some direction from council, because he has requested that we amend the code to basically be in alignment with the International Pool and Spa Code. But to do that, we feel like we need to have a further discussion with council, because I think there is some benefits to still having a fence around that pool. Primarily, like, you have a lockable safety cover, but what if it's left unlocked or it's not closed? But I want to give him the opportunity to express, his feelings and his perspective towards this topic. But when we do this amendment, right, it will change the code for everyone in the city. So we really felt like this was an important topic to bring before council to get some direction. So Mayor and council, if you're okay with Scott coming forward.
Mr. Lang, if you please come forward. And we are a little time constricted, so if you could keep it to 5 minutes or less, and that would allow for a few questions as well.
Thank you for letting me visit with you guys a little bit. I've been working with the city and different directors with City of Caldwell for about 1.5 years now on this topic. On one job specific, but our goal is globally to help update the codes. I appreciate the screen here, because it talks about the swimming pool and spa code, and it talks about a fence or the lockable safety cover. That was not actually adopted when we first started this conversation, and I'm thrilled to see that being adopted at this point in time from the building department. When we first started this conversation, it was about one job specific, and I do want to talk about the job specific as well. But the barrier codes it was Steve Foltz, I think, was the previous director, and then we started with the director prior to that on this original conversation. They couldn't identify how old the code was. They said pre-1960 was the code that was currently in place. Currently, and I'll give a little background on Premier Pools. Premier Pools, we're one of the largest, if not the largest, pool company in the state of Idaho. We're part of a national company. Premier Pools and Spas is a national organization, the largest in the world. There's over 200 locations nationwide. We have insight, and I speak with many of those owners. I have communication with them. I've communicated with them on this topic As of now, from everything that we can see, the city of Caldwell is the only municipality in the nation that has not adopted the ISPSC, the International Pool and Spa Code, in its entirety, period, end of story. Currently, with the addition of the Planning and Zoning Code requiring the fence, it's in contradiction to the actual code. And again, we can have conversations about personal feelings and reasons why personally we feel that way, but as is said many times in governments and different people's social media nowadays, facts don't care about feelings. The facts are, there's a national organization that provides that. And I have some documents. You okay with me approaching and handing these out?
And I think we have adopted the code. So when you
Okay.
said that the city is not, we
No,
have.
you've adopted the code in the building department. Like I
Yeah.
said, currently in contradiction is the planning and zoning ordinance that requiring still a 6-foot tall high fence. Our goal is to have the city of Caldwell in compliance with, again, every municipality that we know of in the nation that doesn't require that, in addition to what is stated in the entirety of the code, section 305 of the ISPSC. In this, it talks about, I mean, you've got paragraphs and paragraphs and pages of requirements of what it requires if you don't have a lockable safety cover or an electronic safety cover. And it basically has a paragraph that says, but if you have a safety cover, you don't, none of those other things apply. The statement actually says, shall not be required to comply with sections 305.2 through 305.7. Not applicable. So in discussions with the different members of the city of Caldwell, two issues have come to our attention as far as reasons why they don't want to do this. One is liability. Well, if we don't require a fence and some child gets hurt, we're liable. Okay, so I'll address that. If we're requiring you or requesting that you follow national code that every other municipality in the nation follows, there's no liability on your side. In this current example, the homeowner is begging the city of Caldwell to just follow this code and not require them to put a fence. The part I wanted to show you as well, the current project that we have where they're requiring to put a fence up, is it okay if I just give this to you? Hand these out?
Yeah.
It's the last page of all of that. Last page of all that shows it's a 3-acre parcel. There's an open pond, there's a big pond on the property, there's a canal on the back of the property. Neither of them are fenced off to the residents. Okay, and so in this example, the code really makes zero sense to require a 6-foot tall fence around the property or around the pool itself, when you've got an open pond and a canal, in addition to an ASTM regulated pool safety cover. We're begging the city to allow this homeowner to finalize their permit. Everything's done, everything's been finalized, every permit inspection's been finalized, with the exception of this requirement. We're begging the city to acknowledge and follow the national code, and eliminate that. One of the papers you have on that prior to that picture is from one of the previous directors, and I have highlighted in there, after reviewing this and working with him for a long time, and he provided this letter 2 weeks before he retired, acknowledged, he said, I believe that there is a hardship because the ordinance has not been updated to include other methods that could safely secure a pool, which is an ASTM regulated safety cover, which they have. So that's our goal. I personally, my goal is to elevate the pool market nationally, elevate the pool market in Idaho. I have put on multiple training classes for inspectors around the valley on proper rebar and structural elements. One of the biggest topics that we're trying to address as well in Idaho is the safety when it comes to Virginia Graham-Baker Act and about plumbing. There are 0 inspections in the state of Idaho for plumbing, none. On commercial pools, there is a national requirement started in November of 2008 for the Virginia Graham-Baker Act, and I can get into that later. Idaho does not even require that to be inspected. What we see going on in pools for plumbing regulations is way, way, way beyond the safety requirements of whether we have a safety cover or not. And we'd love to be able to have further conversations with people about that in all aspects of government. At this point in time is just to acknowledge there is a national standard out there. We're just asking to follow it and not provide more restricting regulations on that at this point in time. So, any questions from that point?
Appreciate it, and it may be more appropriate when this does come forward as a public hearing for discussion or questions at that time. just because we're kind of getting short, unless you do have a specific question or
I
not
do.
for her. For
Being ignorant of lockable safety covers, does that mean it's a hard cover where if you weigh 200 pounds, you can't go on it, or 100 pounds you can, or what?
No, good question. So when they talk about a lockable safety cover, typically the term lockable safety cover, that's a little bit incorrect on the screen. Lockable safety covers is referred to as for a spa cover, which are hard covers that can be locked. The term when they're talking about a pool is a electronic safety cover. And what they are is it's a heavy-duty vinyl that locks into a track. You have a keypad or a key that would basically roll that closed and open. They're designed so you and your entire family could stand and walk across that cover without getting wet in any way.
Oh, okay.
So they have to meet stringent requirements. They talk about the ASTM 1346. It's a 4 or 5 page document of all the requirements that it has to meet to be considered a safety cover. That stamp has to be, or sticker has to be on every cover. It has to be inspected when they go and inspect it to make sure it meets that. And so they are considered to be a safety cover that when it's closed, it's safe. And again, the question of, well, when it's not closed, is it safe? You could go on and on about the barriers of without a safety cover. Most pools in this market don't have safety covers. Idaho and Utah have more pool covers on them than almost all states combined. Part of that because the 3 most common manufacturers of pool covers are in Utah. And there's actually one here in Nampa that makes those. And so people just think you have to have them here, but we have places in New York and Pennsylvania and Michigan and many other places colder weather than ours that they don't do covers at all. But we do a lot of them here as well, so. Good question.
Perfect. Thank you so much. Here, appreciate that very much.
Thank you very much.
Robin, you want to take like 30 seconds just to wrap up, or are you good, or? Okay, we're good. Well, we appreciate that. And so those, sounds like going to planning and zoning this week, you said, and so it should be before council in December for final decision?
Mayor and Council, so the swimming pool barrier is not part of this current amendment package that is going to Planning and Zoning Commission. So I guess the discussion becomes if we as a city feel it is appropriate to amend the zoning ordinances to align with the swimming pool and spa code, or if we feel comfortable leaving the zoning ordinances as is.
Mr. Mayor, I'd like to see it come forward.
Yeah. I just had another question. Director, I've had several phone calls on advertising input for the comprehensive plan. How are we advertising that? Because some folks say, well, there's no signs up and they don't go on the city website. I mean, how do we advertise that?
Sure. Mayor and Councilman Stanek, we do have our public information officer for the city sending out social media posts. We do also have a stakeholder list that they're reaching out to. We have it on the website. I believe our public information officer also put out a press release. And then we also have a committee that we formed for the comprehensive plan, and Councilor Doty sits on that. And those persons that are part of that committee are also helping us with outreach to the public. This is just the first portion of the outreach. There will be lots more where there will be maybe events where people will be invited to the events. There will be maybe some actual public open houses or workshops. This is just that kind of initial kickoff. But we have done quite a bit of outreach already, but we can definitely ask if the public information officer can do some repetitive social media posts and maybe some additional press releases.
Okay, great, super, thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much. And so if you could, if it is possible to have the Planning and Zoning Commission discuss that right there tomorrow.
Yep.
So that could come to council for discussion. Obviously, things we want to know, are there planning and zoning departments that have additional requirements like this? We know that the building code is that, and that is adopted, but are there other agencies that do have additional requirements outside of the building code? Would be good to look at before that comes back to council. And that should be in December for those discussions, correct, and decisions in regards to all of these items?
With the exception of the swimming pool barrier, that is not in the amendments that are going to P&Z Commission.
Could it not be added, though, for them to discuss that tomorrow?
I guess I'll defer to legal counsel. Is that something we could add to the P&Z Commission? I think we kind of talked about it with the sign stuff too. We can, as long as we mention it during the meeting they approve it with those modifications, and then it can come to council. Okay, we can certainly do that.
I think it'd be worthwhile to have that done. I think the
Okay.
council would agree with that, so.
Sounds
Okay,
good.
forgive me, that
Thank
ends
you.
our time, so we're gonna take a 30-second break, and we'll be right back to start city council.